What's up? Headspace Skwatta, giving you the most impactful news of South African hip-hop. It's your brother from the ancient mother, VJ
Dakeza.
Skwatta. Dakeza. South African hip-hop has been doing it for a minute now.
Yeah.
And I don't think we realize how long our community, how long the culture in South Africa has been active, because you know there's a kind of a contention of where you would start the SA hip-hop journey, but I think overwhelmingly speaking, if you look at when artists started to release albums and when these albums started to be recognized by Mzansi at large,
Yeah.
you'll find that 2004
and 5
to 5 are crucial years in the rise of South African hip-hop as a mainstay in general South African culture. Besides being omayinika abanxiba ibhrukhwe waku waku, siqale ufumana a general sense of acknowledgement amongst the masses ngalanyaka. So if you could have an era up in South Africa, because you know in America the golden era is always listed from about 89 to 96
yeah,
as the era where hip-hop's commercial viability reached a peak and there was a level where it had arrived. Up in South Africa, the closest thing to an old school chapter where we would begin, or an golden era chapter, but I prefer the term old school because
yeah,
golden era,
it
has implications about that was the best and most active era, and I think East South African hip-hop is still too young for us to gauge which era was the best. Maybe that's another episode. But I think saying where does the first and initial school, which we can term the old school hip-hop of South Africa, truly begin? Undoubtedly, we have to start by looking at the year 2000, Sijonge, City 2010, because I feel like from 2001 to 2010, we can gauge a rise from heads moving into doing their little own thing, the movement in Cape Town with the breakdancers and the b-boys, the impact that Prophet of the City started to have in the early 90s, because Prophets of the City, Sinyaka, we've mentioned all of this in previous episodes. Uguti, there were acts that
you could say they laid the foundation.
They laid the foundation. These were our pioneers, quote-unquote pioneers. But if we're talking about commercial viability, we have to start round about 2004, 2005. Now, this is an episode about albums. This is an episode about rap albums that really helped transcend the culture and reach a level of being acknowledged among South Africans at large. So this is the Headspace top 5 old school rap / hip hop albums. So I think what's really important to mention before we go into our list is the fact that these are albums that went beyond the heads.
So it's not Head's favorite.
It's
album.
not.
I think we'll probably have an episode on that.
Oh, you know what I mean? Because here we're talking about albums that were able to do the work for hip hop to reach the masses at large, right?
Albums that had impact.
An impact. So our number 5, I would really give it to the Book of ProVerb.
The Book of ProVerb. Yeah.
The Book of ProVerb was an impactful album. We're talking about
2005, right?
Yeah, 2005. Yeah. We're talking about a guy from Kimberley, which is pretty much seen as one of those dorpies. And he comes to the big city of Joburg. He makes an impact. I mean, I remember, picture the ProVerb Ramen hitting the mic with expert timing. Him going into attention and owning that track. Him doing the rounds at YFM, not only as a rapper, but in the background. See, the one thing about Verb that we can acknowledge is the fact that he's one of those cats who understood the balance of hip-hop as a career, and also how to maintain yourself financially in the industry. Verb always understood that in order for you to keep yourself within the space, you have to find something meaningful to do that will keep you going. And I feel his sound design, his background in sound engineering allowed him, and producing, allowed him to be able to work in radio, be involved in the kind of nitty-gritties of what the industry has to offer and how it operates, and observe it from behind the curtain, and also as an artist. And I feel like this has played a major role in his longevity. But back to his album, my God, Microphone Sweet Home,
Microphone Sweet Home, Women, Heartbeat, and then Kimberly Rise. Those were notable singles.
The Book of Proverb was an accomplishment because Ukole is a stereotype that you have to rap in an indigenous language in order for you to make it across the masses. Proverb proved for us one thing: with his cannabis influence, with his whole hip-hop head instinct, he learned how to have good songwriting, and he learned how to create songs that subject matter and whose mission was to address issues that were happening in South Africa. He is probably the ultimate model for me, more than Utumi, of how MCs who rap in English can relate to the general South African. Because siyathanda ukucinga kukho esi stigma of if you rap ngesilungu, every South African will say, you know? But Proverb, I feel like the English is not the problem. The problem is the referencing. If utalekasi, why are you referring to the hood as the projects? If we sell Old Brown, kuteni umanu popa Hennessy. I feel like the hip hop is about referencing. It's about drawing from experiences. Proverb was able to draw from South African experiences, sample South African music, talk about South African issues, and this was Gesi didn't matter because ultimately South Africans felt involved. So shout out to the Book of Proverb.
Especially when Kimberly Rise, the subject matter there.
Come on. And I would go as far as saying Ugudu Proverb is one of the greatest of all times in South Africa as a whole. And this album helped cement the fact that, one, it's not about English. It's about reference. Point of reference yako indoni. His authenticity was always affirmed as much as
by cannabis influence.
Yes, hip hop heads know. Proverb is basically a kind of sophisticated version of cannabis. But in a way, I love that because Proverb does what cannabis couldn't do with his own style even better. And I acknowledge that. And so the Book of Proverb laid that foundation. That's our number 5. Going into our number 4, we've mentioned this man. He's a mythical figure in the SA hip-hop circles. And also, you know, the interesting thing is I find that when we're looking at hip-hop's commercial breakthrough, South African hip-hop's commercial breakthrough, we're talking about 2004, 2005. So
here's the thing there. The thing about 2004 and 2005 is most artists dropped their debut albums around about that time. And you know, most rappers debut are probably fire. So that's the thing. The hunger was there, but you but I can do this shit. But so 2005, that's why crucial 2005, 2004 and 2005.
I want us to build this up because a lot of our listeners and a lot of our viewers will probably be thinking to themselves, what is it about 2004, 2005 that all of a sudden brought this like massive cusp, this rise of rappers entering, and also these rappers were entering into a scene which was like pretty much commercial. So who were the people behind the scenes opening the gates, allowing hip hop to have a chance in the South African music economy? We're gonna be answering that question pretty soon. Watch the list as it goes along because Proverb was our number 5, and now we're moving into Heads and Tails, which pretty much speaks for itself. Soweto,
Wozuzobabona.
ProVerb was the first South African MC to have that delicate balance of being super lyrical, super aware of his environment, super South African, super kasi, super ghetto in the context that people could understand. So he was the great balancing act between commercial viability and hip-hop community relevance. So definitely the great Pro gotta have our number 4 spot. And as this list works itself up, I want our viewers to watch something very interesting happen, and it reveals something about the history of SA hip-hop. Number 3, Double HP.
Umang.
The hip-hop Banzul. He releases it, Umang, and then he comes with Mang Reloaded. So it's one album. It constitutes Tswaka. It constitutes Harambe. It constitutes
On My Own.
Cheba. Ding, ding, ding. Now the thing about Hip Hop Pansula is that I remember Heads giving him a hard time for being so commercially affirmative, to put it in like a political language.
It's even there on his name.
Exactly.
Lipansula
hip hop.
Yeah.
And I don't think we realize how revolutionary Jabba's approach to the game was. Jabba was one of those acts who understood that if I want to be hip hop in Mzansi, I have to be hip hop and Mzansi.
Yeah.
I have to be hip hop in a way that South Africans can digest. I have to understand that it's one thing to love hip hop, but it's another to love hip hop as a South African, and those two go together. I can't separate my hip hopness from my South Africanness. So Ipansula, we know Ipansula is the derivative in America for somebody who's a G, for somebody who's in the know, for somebody who's in the style. Ipansula is somebody who really epitomizes what ghetto confidence is about. So by naming yourself Hip Hop Pansula, you're already identifying yourself as somebody who's saying
Hip Hop G.
I'm a hip hop G in the South African context. And that album, that album was culture crossing. That album had songs which made us cringe, like which basically were like very candy, very poppy, very airy, had these colorful beats. You know, Heads were trying to be grimy back in those days, holding their crotch, wearing hoodies and trying to be all hyper masculine. Jabba didn't give a shit about that. He was shaking his ass, he was dancing with the ladies, he was doing it in a finesse, Gesitswana. He was being a Mutswako originator, he was being a lyricist, he was being an entertainer, he was being, I've always looked at Double HP as our Biggie, as the guy that wasn't afraid to make hip hop shiny, flamboyant, feminine and masculine at the same time. The guy who could be happy, who could express his sadness. That album is the very same album. My favorite cut from that album is On My Own. God damn.
Yeah, where he showed his skills.
He chronicles and he takes us on a hip hop journey. He says we're the type of brothers who could drink at any bar now. We went from rap to being full-time pros now. He talks about how transcending the culture is important. Saying, listen, I come from the cypher, but now I've made it into the industry and I want to help give back and grow South African hip hop. Jabba eternally thanks, and that album has marked itself as a testament in South African hip hop, and that's definitely gotta be our number
3. Wow, if we have 3 albums that are so strong, damn, what are the top 2? You know?
Listen, one thing we shouldn't forget: Book of ProVerb, 2005.
Yeah.
Heads and Tails,
2005.
Mang Reloaded, 2005. Can you notice something here? 2005 was really what we could call the ultimate commercial breakthrough of South African hip-hop. And maybe there's an episode in this. Maybe we should try to find out what were the kind of moving parts that helped make 2004 to 2005 really a year where South African hip-hop had a chance to be commercially viable.
Right? And I think it goes back to when we chatted about who were these people who gave hip-hop a chance.
Right.
Yeah,
and
so
now, I feel like we're beginning to answer the question by going into our number 2 spot. Because considering number 2, Mnandi Tlinga, Mangiti preach black wena uti Afro. It has to go to Styling Gel.
Styling Gel.
I remember.
I didn't like that motherfucker.
I remember because Styling Gel coincides with a lot of things.
Yeah.
Remember the series Gazlam?
Yeah.
And remember the soundtrack to that. But the single Pitch Black Afro was a soundtrack to the series. And I feel like it captures a time in South African media where content that was about documenting township stories in their authenticity was the rage. It was a time where young black South African media practitioners, whether you were a scriptwriter, a movie maker, an artist, they had the chance. It was fertile ground for the industry to recognize our stories. And Pitch Black will figure in the cusp of that, a strong member of the Joburg hip-hop community who a lot of cats never gave props because, let's be honest, a lot of what Pitch Black raps is, look, a lot of what he raps is also gibberish. Skool is kwa.
Yeah, Skool is kwa.
Sengila is not real words. But then again, in the States, you had Das Effects talking about stiggity iggity wiggly. Yeah. So I feel like when it comes to language and when it comes to bending what language capabilities and expressions are, Pitch Black Afro was an innovator. Pitch Black Afro is a thorough MC. With all of his Busta Rhymes influence, he did something that was uniquely Kasi. He did something that was uniquely South African hip-hop. And yes, him wearing an Afro piece as some kind of a gimmick could be seen as a campy pop approach to trying to turn yourself into a gimmick. But we can't deny the skill, the talent, and we can't deny the overall artistic integrity of this album. From the actual single, to the remix, to Anginanda Banawe,
to the Southern one, Day in the Life, my favorite track,
to the funny skits in between. This was a project which made people Elokshin realize that, listen, let rap thing is also ours.
Yeah.
And Pitch Black Afro did it with an edge that I feel Pro didn't have. Because Pro might have had the lyricism, but Pitch Black Afro had a kind of relatability and humor that made people disarm themselves. Pitch Black Afro was like Lamchitekasu Maziyo, who makes you laugh and who just makes you appreciate brothers in the townships trying to do something for themselves. So shout out to Pitch Black.
Another thing though, it also broke records.
It did! Talk about the case.
Because you must remember, before you only know to have 15,000.
Damn it.
Yeah, go to have 15,000 who gold now. Back in the days, gold was 25,000 copies. And Pitch Black Afro made 50,000, sold 50,000 copies of Styling Gel, which was unheard of, especially with hip hop.
Highest selling
Land Rover for a long time.
So we can say what we want about the man with the gap, but the one thing is that he made South African hip hop viable.
Yeah.
He taught us something about what South Africans like. He taught us something about being true to yourself, about being free to be you. He taught us a lot, and I know when we look at his story, there's a lot of things you could say. There's an episode in that too, and his demise, if you want to call it a demise. But I also want to talk about the fact that Styling Gel in the backdrop was maneuvered by DJ Cleo. And the thing about DJ Cleo is that I feel like this was an album where he really had the opportunity to flex what he could do. The thing about Cleo is that he's a great mimicker of other people's styles. Famously mimicked Mdu's style, famously mimicked Speakery's style, famously jumps on a lot of bandwagons. But I feel like this was the one
where he showed
point in his life where Cleo showed us what he could do as a musician. I love Ndofa because it takes the same sample from Notorious B.I.G.'s joint and it flips it in a South African way. So Styling Gel is important in that sense that it's an album which really marked how hip-hop could relate to South Africa. So it had to be our number 2.
It had to be number 2.
And also, notice something here. The first 4, 3 to 2 albums, right? 4 4 and 3, 2005, right?
2005.
Now 2. It happens in
2004.
So now with Pitch Black not only made massive accomplishments in terms of sales, he was pioneering in a year where not a lot of albums reached. In fact, he was the only album.
He was the only album
that reached that plateau.
Yeah. In fact, it was the only album who went gold. In fact,
exactly. South African hip hop was.
So he went platinum. Okay.
Let's go to our number 1.
Who?
Our number 1 has to go to Moya, Moya, Skwatta Kamp, Mkhukhu Funkshen.
What can you say? Yo, this album.
I remember being in high school and this album dropping and realizing as a young.
I was in matric.
And realizing as a young kid, Guti, listen, hip hop was now becoming something that South Africans could fully relate to. Because here's where the milestone of Skwatta Kamp lies. They were an act which was practically classic hip hop.
Yeah.
And here's what you need to notice about Skwatta Kamp. Initial M became Unish, right?
Yeah.
Flabbergast became Uflaba. Phantom Slick became Uslika. There was
Infa Diesel
became Infa. Skwatta Kamp was a group who understood the fact that they had to drop the Americanisms and really become more South African in their approach. Because from joints, projects like Skwatta Campaign and Cut and Join, you basically have a Wu-Tang archetype. A bunch of niggas rapping that grimy, rugged, hyper-masculine hip-hop in a way that's very American influenced. But a transition happens from those projects to Mkhukhu Funkshen.
Something happened
and
someone came,
and that's another episode.
Yeah.
But Skwatta Kamp realized that they needed to translate hip-hop into a way which was South African, which in a way which was true to Ilogishi, in a way which was true to the experience of the demographic. And Mkhukhu Funkshen was that album. It was super important. I mean,
it dropped in 2003.
It dropped in 2003. It pioneered in a year where no other hip hop act really was transcending the hip hop space.
Yeah.
And getting the everyday South African.
And people must know what we mean about that, because we know there were cashless society dropping, but this for the heads. Good definitive where Landuka was the end is for the heads.
It's for the heads.
Yeah. We're talking about something that transcended.
Yeah. Mkhukhu Funkshen had story to tell. Itanyani, Eskaleni, Umoya, all these narratives of South African hip hop in a way that was kasi enough for the masses to relate to.
Yeah.
But hip hop enough for the heads to acknowledge and appreciate, and the rest was history.
Yeah.
They
had no competition.
You know what I'm saying?
No competition. And it dropped in 2003. I have to stress that. So if you look at this top 5, it's like number 5, number 4, number 3. It's all dropped in 2005, which is a time where the rappers were dropping.
Now we're seeing 2005, 2004, and our earliest being 2003. So we've done something like a very formidable, and I feel like fundamental here for our audience, is that we've actually helped highlight the point at which South African hip hop was beginning to cross over from being like a weird niche genre that nobody could really understand to being something that was also having a conversation with the general South Africa at large. So these 5 albums epitomize the old school chapter, and we call it old school because it initiated this tradition of how to make South African hip hop in a way that the general South African populace can appreciate. These are our old school lists, and most definitely we gotta have our new school list.
Yeah, we're gonna have a new school. Obviously, the new school is coming.
Yeah. So from our old school list, this is our top 5, and I think it teaches us a lot of things, because the one thing I'm learning from this whole top 5 is that A word, authenticity. Who are you rapping to?
Yeah.
What are their experiences? Which communities do you come from? Because I think we tend to try and take America with us and give it to the people. But all these 5 acts showed us an example of rappers who said, I will take the American influence and translate it in an experience that is true to me and the people that I live around. And so I feel like for heads, for rappers, this top 5 is a lesson. That case? Any?
Top 5. Don't you want honorable mention? One is hey man, got the album Etile had also a name.
Yeah.
Why couldn't it creep? You know, there are albums that we wanted to like we wanted to fit play top 5. So,
this was a hard list.
Yeah, it was a hard list. It was actually top 5.
There were a lot of rappers who were active in building South African hip hop, but ultimately it went to those whose impact was resonated the most, you know, and whose albums had probably more singles and had more of a connection, a deeper connection with the listeners, than maybe just 1 or 2 singles. So honorable mentions are important because we have to have 5 for the purposes of a list, or top 5 dead or alive. But maybe if we had like 2 that we could talk about, what would you put in there?
Motherland Crank.
Oh my gosh.
Josie.
We don't talk about these cats enough.
Yeah, I think dropped in 2007.
Motherland Crank was important.
Yeah, that was important.
It was genre bending. It was it was masters at work. It was
hey, Bongani Fasi was flexing.
Bongani Fasi showing us how to again translate global relevance to local authenticity. Them taking a veteran in the form of Ishmael. A hook master. And a South African crooner of note. Them taking the young and fresh Leslie, aka Delez, whose background in growing up in America gave him that kind of influence of the latest cool kid tricks back then, but in a way that South Africans could understand, because they were all dressed up in their makip skateboarding in the streets of Jersey, going in Newtown, going in Maboneng, really dominating the scene and showing us that you could be hip-hop while being South African at the same time. Not forgetting Crazy Lou. Rest in peace to Crazy Lou, who also showed us that, you know, you could be American influenced but still do it in a way that general South Africans could appreciate. So I feel like if George's secret weapon was the fact that these were young people who learned from the past of how South African hip-hop was trying to innovate and did their thing, definitely an honorable mention. Until this day, you can't tell me that What's With The Attitude, you know, all my peeps across the land doesn't slap.
Yeah, it still slaps. No, it slaps.
I mean, if it doesn't slap for you, you know, conservative motherfuckers, I know it slaps for the chicks out there, alright?
Yeah.
Alright.
The second one, last one. Who dark or blue, it tear gas?
Contention here. Because I know a lot of cats wouldn't give this to tear gas, but justify this album for the audience real quick.
Look, bruh.
I know you love this album.
I love this album. Okay. I had to name them more pool matamba. I had to convince this motherfucker.
There were a lot. I mean, we looked at a lot of cats. We looked at Zabs, JR, but ultimately I had to admit the impact of tear gas because of this argument.
Look, in tear gas, they came out of nowhere in 2006. Yabona with with another chance, no chance. Boom. But the whole album, they didn't have other strong singles.
Right.
Yeah, but I felt like they didn't have a lot of singles too. But they rode on chance. Yeah, but and it was a kick like Bar Silapa, and we're like, who this guy's? Oh, Mpumalang, okay, but Utako Blue, bruh, they had for the chicks, like that.
I remember how South Africa loved, and how heads loved to hate it.
You see, and then on the same album, they had Go Away.
Yeah,
that's a single.
Yeah.
Hardcore for the heads, and because they started with Ulanduka Umshobowam, but then they showed the heads Bachonga.
We can rap. We can do that crime.
We can do that grimy shit, and then But better la way is what Party 101 Utira on the
so
production.
So also on some, we can do that commercial.
Do that commercial plug and then such a long but it's plus guy. There's such a rapper and then that drop Goodfellas. Featuring Pro, no Landuga, no Double HP.
Showing love to the culture.
Showing love to the culture and rapping their asses off.
No doubt.
Yeah.
This album was the beginning of a lot of things. It was the beginning of a career that we'd later see through KO and Mai. It was the beginning of a lot of other South African hip-hop acts understanding the importance of this same balance as Tetagayo through acts like Double HP and Pro. The balance of being true to the tenets of hip-hop, originality, technical skill, this consistency, but also realizing the importance of mass appeal. So shout out to Tear Gas and Josie as our honorable mentions. We could have had a lot of albums here, but ultimately our top 5 really is here to remain as a testament to the historic moves that South African hip-hop has made, and to the interesting fact that Skwatta Kamp stands alone as an act which in the year 2003 pioneered a movement which would later start kicking its feet in the year 2005. So I really think one thing heads should learn from this episode is to give respect to the Skwatta Kamp, and another one is to understand the value of what authenticity brings when you are a rapper in South Africa. That as global as hip-hop might be as a movement, in order for us to reach our masses, we need to ask ourselves, who are we rapping for and how can we rap for them? And yeah, I know, VJ, I'm rapping for me. These are my experiences. But come on, yo, you have to be honest with yourself. You come from a community where islang ngesethu, fashion ngeyetu. So to bring yourself across in a way that is not true to that is really kind of committing artistic suicide.
Yeah.
So I think the top 5 old school South African hip-hop albums, List Your Headspace, stands as an example of how MCs could win over South Africa. I think there's an episode in there too.
Yeah, we'll have an episode. Yeah,
but
we'll have an episode.
Without going too deep into that,
yeah.
Ikamalamgu VJ, you know, folks, I love you.
No Takeza, Masambe.
Headspace for life.